I never thought a few words spoken at Christmas could almost cost me my life. One moment, I believed I was walking into a family gathering. The next, I was standing outside in the freezing cold, realizing I was no longer welcome anywhere that called itself home. I waited, hoping someone would remember me, open the door, choose me. They did not. As the cold crept into my bones, something far deeper shattered inside me. This is the story of how being rejected by the people I loved most nearly broke me, and how that night changed everything I thought I knew about love, loyalty, and survival. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now, settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. My name is Margaret Wilson, though most people have called me Maggie for as long as I can remember. I am 68 years old, a widow, and I live alone in a small apartment in Pennsylvania where the walls creak when the heat comes on and the windows fog over at the first hint of winter. It is not a sad place, not exactly. It is clean, orderly, predictable. Everything in it is where I left it, and most days, that feels like enough. I wake early out of habit, even though there is nowhere I truly need to be. I make coffee the same way every morning and drink it by the window, watching the street slowly come to life. Cars pass, neighbors walk their dogs. The world keeps moving, whether I step into it or not. After my husband died, I learned how important routines could be. They gave shape to the days when grief made time feel loose and endless. I was married for over 40 years to a man who believed in responsibility above all else. He worked steadily, spoke carefully, and rarely complained. When he passed, it was quiet, almost gentle, but the silence he left behind was anything but. In the months that followed, I did what I had always done. I kept going. I took care of what needed to be handled and learned how to be strong without anyone noticing. I have one child, my son Ethan. Being his mother has always been the center of my identity, long before I was ever a widow. I raised him to work hard, to be kind, to build a life better than the one we started with. When he grew up, went to college, and eventually married, I told myself that all the sacrifices had been worth it. That was what mothers were meant to believe. After my husband died, I sold the house we had raised Ethan in. It was too large for one person, and the memories were heavy. The money from that sale became the foundation of Ethan's new life. It helped him buy a home in the suburbs, a place with a yard and good schools for his children. Every month after that, I sent what I could. I helped with the mortgage, paid for insurance, and set aside small amounts for my grandchildren's future. I never thought of it as generosity. I thought of it as responsibility, the natural extension of being a mother. I am not wealthy. I simply learned how to live with less. I told myself that my needs were small, that love did not require recognition, and that giving quietly was its own reward. Somewhere along the way, helping became the way I proved I still mattered. Christmas has always been the one time of year when I allowed myself to hope for more. It was the season that once meant crowded tables, shared meals, and laughter that filled every room. In recent years, those gatherings faded into brief phone calls and polite messages. Still, I kept believing that traditions could be restored, that distance was temporary. This year, when my daughter-in-law sent a message inviting me to Christmas dinner, it felt like a door reopening. The words were short and careful, but they were enough. I read them more than once, letting myself imagine that maybe, just maybe, I still had a place in my son's life. If you are still watching and beginning to sense that something is quietly wrong beneath the surface, comment number 1 below so I know you are with me. Because what happened next was the first moment I realized that being invited did not mean being wanted. Now, let's move on to chapter 2. The message arrived on a quiet afternoon while I was folding laundry, the radio murmuring softly in the background. It was from Lauren, my daughter-in-law. I remember staring at her name on the screen longer than necessary, as if it might disappear if I blinked. She rarely reached out directly. Most years, Christmas passed with a brief message relayed through Ethan, polite and distant, like a formality that needed to be checked off a list. This time was different. She was inviting me to their house for Christmas dinner. The message itself was short, careful, almost clinical. She told me what time to come, suggested I arrive early, and added a line about keeping things light. Nothing heavy, nothing sad. I read those words over and over, telling myself not to read too much into them. People were busy. Hosting was stressful. I reminded myself of that again and again because the alternative felt too painful to consider. Still, something about the tone made me feel as though I had already been given rules, conditions for belonging. I told myself I could follow them. I had spent most of my life learning how to make myself easy to be around. I decided to treat the invitation like something fragile, something that could break if I handled it carelessly. I planned carefully. I baked a loaf of bread the way Ethan used to, like when he was younger, measuring each ingredient slowly, deliberately. I wrapped gifts for the children, small but thoughtful, and chose something simple for Lauren. Nothing flashy, nothing that might seem like too much. I wanted to arrive as someone grateful, not someone who took up space. On the morning of Christmas Eve, I stood in front of my closet longer than usual. I chose clothes that were neat but modest, warm but not attention-grabbing. Before I left, I pinned a small piece of jewelry to my coat, something my husband had given me years ago. It was not meant to be seen. It was for me, a quiet reminder that I was not walking into that house entirely alone. As I locked my apartment door behind me, I felt a flutter of nerves that surprised me. I told myself it was excitement. Hope has a way of disguising itself like that. Outside, the cold air bit at my cheeks, sharp and familiar. Snow had begun to fall, soft at first, settling over the sidewalks and parked cars. I watched it gather, thinking how peaceful it looked when it had not yet been disturbed. The drive to Ethan's house felt longer than usual. I watched neighborhoods blur past the window, each one brighter and more decorated than the last. When I finally arrived, the contrast struck me immediately. Their house glowed with light. Cars lined the street. Laughter drifted through the closed windows, muffled but unmistakable. It sounded like a place where people belonged. I stood on the walkway for a moment, steadying myself, adjusting my grip on the gifts. When the door opened, Lauren greeted me with a nod rather than an embrace. There was no warmth in her voice, no pause to ask how I was. She stepped aside, already turning back toward the noise inside, and I followed, suddenly unsure of where to put myself. As I crossed the threshold, I felt it settle in my chest, that quiet sense I had known too well, the feeling that I needed to be careful, that I was welcome only as long as I did not ask for too much. I told myself it was just nerves, just the beginning of the night, and that everything would find its place once dinner began. If you are still here and you felt that uneasy shift when hope started to mix with discomfort, comment number 2 below. The next part is where waiting turns into exclusion, and the truth begins to show itself. Let's continue to chapter 3. The moment I stepped fully into the house, I realized how little space there was for me in it. The living room was crowded with people I did not know, their coats draped over chairs, their voices layered together in easy familiarity. Glasses clinked. Music hummed softly in the background. No one turned when I entered. For a second, I stood there holding my gifts, unsure whether I was meant to move or wait to be noticed. Lauren appeared at my side almost immediately, her hand already gesturing toward the hallway before I could say anything. She spoke quickly, explaining that things were still being arranged and that it would be easier if I waited downstairs for a bit. Her words were polite, practiced, and delivered without hesitation. There was no invitation to sit, no pause to ask if I needed anything. I nodded, because nodding had always been easier than questioning. She led me to the basement door and pointed the way down. The sound of laughter followed me as I descended the steps, growing fainter with each one. When the door closed above me, it did not slam. It clicked shut softly, decisively, like something meant to stay closed. The basement was a laundry room, unfinished and cool. A single fluorescent light buzzed overhead. The washing machine rattled in the corner, and the smell of detergent hung in the air. I set the gifts carefully on a folding table and sat on a plastic chair near the wall. My coat stayed on. I folded my hands in my lap and told myself it would only be a few minutes. Minutes stretched. The sounds from upstairs continued, muffled but constant. I could hear bursts of laughter, chairs scraping, someone calling out cheerfully. Time became hard to measure. I checked my watch once, then again later, embarrassed by my own impatience. No one came down, no footsteps on the stairs, no voice calling my name. I began to wonder if I had misunderstood. Maybe I had arrived too early. Maybe I was meant to stay out of the way until dinner was ready. I replayed Lauren's message in my head, searching for something I had missed. The longer I sat there, the smaller I felt, like an item set aside to be dealt with later. I thought about Christmases long ago, when my own kitchen had been the center of everything. I used to stand for hours cooking, laughing, calling people to the table. I had known exactly where I belonged then. Sitting alone in that basement, the contrast felt almost unreal, as if I were watching someone else's life unfold. Eventually, I told myself that waiting quietly would not change anything. I picked up the loaf of bread I had brought, smoothed my coat, and started up the stairs. My heart beat faster with each step, not from excitement, but from the strange fear of being seen. At the top, before I could step fully into the room, Lauren moved in front of me. Her expression tightened, just slightly. She told me, gently but firmly, that it was not the right time and that the dinner was meant for close family. I stood there, the warmth of the house brushing against me but not reaching my skin. I nodded again, murmured that I understood, and turned back toward the stairs. As I did, I heard her voice carry into the room behind me, light and dismissive, as she spoke to someone else. She referred to me not by name, but by what I provided. The words landed clearly, unmistakably. I did not react. I walked back down the stairs slowly and sat where I had been before. The room felt colder now, though nothing had changed. I stared at the gifts on the table and felt something settle inside me, heavy and hollow. The thought crossed my mind that I could leave, that I could gather my things and go home. Instead, I stayed. I waited, because waiting was what I had always done. If you are still watching, and that moment in the basement stayed with you, comment number 3 to let me know, because what happened next was no longer subtle. It was public, undeniable, and impossible to ignore. Let's move on to chapter 4. I sat in the basement longer than I should have, staring at the concrete floor as if it might tell me what to do next. The words I had overheard replayed themselves in my head, not loudly, but steadily, like a drip I could not turn off. I felt foolish for being surprised. Still, the idea of standing up and leaving made my chest tighten. Leaving would make me the problem. Leaving would confirm everything they already seemed to believe about me. So, I stayed. I told myself that patience had always been my strength, that if I waited quietly, someone would remember me. Ethan would come down the stairs, confused, apologetic, and everything would soften. I clung to that thought because it was easier than admitting how small I felt sitting there alone. Eventually, I heard the sound of movement upstairs change. Chairs scraped against the floor. Voices gathered closer together. Someone laughed loudly, and then there was a call for everyone to come to the table. The word dinner floated down the stairwell, warm and unmistakable. I waited for my name to follow. It did not. The moment stretched, then passed, leaving only the hum of the washing machine and the distant rhythm of celebration. That was when I realized that if I wanted to be seen, I would have to make myself visible. I stood slowly, my knees stiff from the cold, and smoothed my coat. I practiced what I might say in my head, nothing dramatic, nothing that would draw attention. I would simply remind them that I was there. I would sit quietly, smile when expected, and take up as little space as possible. The stairs felt steeper on the way up. When I reached the top, the dining room came into view all at once. People were already seated, leaning toward one another, glasses raised. The conversation faltered as they noticed me standing there. For a brief second, the room was silent. Every face turned in my direction, curiosity mixing with discomfort. I said that I thought we were all eating together. The words sounded thin even to me. Lauren's expression tightened, her smile fixed in place. She responded calmly, explaining that this was meant to be a family dinner and that she did not want any tension. The way she spoke made it clear that the tension she meant was me. I searched for Ethan then. He met my eyes for a moment, just long enough for me to recognize the conflict there, and then he looked away. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. He said it might be better if I went home, that everyone just wanted a peaceful evening. He did not raise his voice. He did not defend me. He simply chose quiet over me. Something inside me folded in on itself. I had so many things I wanted to say, explanations I thought might change how they saw me, but none of them seemed to matter anymore. I realized that this was not a misunderstanding. It was a decision that had already been made. Lauren stepped closer and took my arm, not roughly, but firmly enough that I understood I was not being given a choice. She guided me toward the front door as the conversation behind us slowly resumed. Laughter returned, cautious at first, then freer once I was no longer in the room. The door opened and cold air rushed in, sharp and immediate. I stepped outside, still holding my coat closed with one hand. The door shut behind me with a final click. I stood there for a moment, staring at the wood grain, waiting for it to open again. It did not. Snow drifted down softly, settling on the steps and the railing. Inside, the house glowed with warmth and sound. Outside, the night pressed in around me. I pulled my coat tighter and told myself this was only temporary. I still believed, for just a little while longer, that I would be let back in. If you are still here and wondering how far rejection can go, comment number 4 below. The next chapter is where silence becomes dangerous and waiting turns into something much worse. Let's continue to chapter 5. The door closed behind me with a sound that was softer than I expected, a small, final click that echoed louder than any shout. I stood on the porch for a moment, staring at the wood grain where my hand had just been, waiting for it to open again. Inside, the music continued without pause. Laughter rose and fell, warm and careless, as if nothing had changed. At first, I told myself this was temporary. Maybe Lauren needed a moment to calm down. Maybe Ethan would come after me once he realized how cold it was. I did not knock right away. I did not want to be dramatic. I did not want to confirm the unspoken accusation that I ruined things simply by existing. Snow drifted down in slow, steady flakes, collecting along the edges of the steps. The air felt sharp in my lungs, colder than I had expected. I had worn my coat assuming I would be inside most of the evening, sitting near the table, sipping something warm. I shifted my weight from one foot to the other, trying to keep the cold from settling in. Minutes passed, then more. The porch light cast a dull yellow circle around me, the rest of the yard disappearing into darkness. I pressed my hands together and blew into them, watching my breath bloom and fade. Inside, I could hear someone tell a story, followed by a burst of laughter. No one mentioned my name. Eventually, I stepped closer to the door and knocked lightly, then harder. I called out, my voice thinner than I meant it to be. There was no response. I pulled my phone from my pocket with numb fingers and called Ethan. The line rang. I imagined him glancing at the screen, hesitating, telling himself he would deal with it later. The call went unanswered. A wave of unease moved through me then, replacing the embarrassment. I knocked again, louder this time, my knuckles stinging. I called once more. Through the glass, I saw movement inside. Someone crossed the hallway. For a brief, foolish moment, hope surged. Then I saw Ethan at the edge of the room. He looked toward the door, toward me, and for a second, our eyes met through the glass. His face was tight, unreadable. Slowly, deliberately, he reached up and pulled the curtain closed. The fabric slid into place, blocking the light, blocking me. Something inside me went very still. I stepped back, the cold suddenly more than just discomfort. My hands trembled, not from fear exactly, but from the effort of holding myself together. I did not knock again. There was no point. The decision had been made, and it was not mine. The chill crept deeper, into my legs, my fingers, my thoughts. My shoes felt thin against the frozen ground. I tried to move toward the railing, thinking I might sit for a moment, gather myself, then figure out what to do next. My foot slid on the ice. I reached out instinctively, but there was nothing to grab. I went down hard, the impact knocking the breath from my chest. I lay there, staring up at the dark sky as snow landed on my coat, melting, then freezing again. Pain pulsed through my hip and shoulder, dull and spreading. I tried to push myself up, but my arms felt weak, uncooperative. My hands no longer seemed to belong to me. The sounds from inside the house faded, not because they stopped, but because my body was retreating from them. I thought of Ethan as a child, small and warm, his hand tucked into mine on winter mornings. I had always been the one to pull him closer, to shield him from the cold. Now, the cold pressed in from all sides. I opened my mouth to call his name, but the sound barely escaped. Snow gathered on my sleeves, my hair. The porch light blurred. The world narrowed to the rhythm of my breathing, slow and uneven, until even that began to feel optional. Then quietly, without ceremony, everything slipped away. I drifted in and out of awareness, the world breaking into pieces that did not quite fit together. The cold no longer stabbed the way it had at first. Instead, it pressed in slowly, like a heavy blanket laid over my thoughts. Time lost its edges. I could not tell how long I had been on the porch, only that the night felt endless and very far away. At some point, I understood that no one was coming. The door would not open. The curtain would not move again. That realization arrived without drama, settling quietly in my chest. I stopped listening for footsteps. I stopped waiting for my phone to ring. There was a strange calm in accepting what had already happened. My body felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. My hands were stiff, my legs heavy. Even breathing seemed like something that required instruction. I noticed that my thoughts were slowing, drifting toward memories instead of the present. I had heard once that this was dangerous, that it was easy to slip away when the cold grew tired of fighting you. Knowing that did not make it easier to stay awake. What surprised me was not the fear of dying, but the sudden clarity of a choice I had never faced before. For most of my life, my decisions had revolved around other people. What Ethan needed, what my family expected, what would keep the peace. Lying there in the snow, none of that mattered anymore. The only question left was whether I wanted to keep holding on. Images surfaced without warning. Ethan, as a toddler, bundled in a coat too big for him, his hand wrapped around my finger. Nights when he burned with fever, and I sat awake, counting his breaths, whispering promises that he would be all right. I had been so sure then that protecting him was my purpose. The memory hurt more than the cold ever could. For a moment, bitterness flared, not loud enough to warm me, but sharp enough to sting. I had given everything I knew how to give. I had shown up again and again, even when it cost me. And still, here I was, alone on a porch, fading into the dark. The unfairness of it pressed down on me, heavy and exhausting. Then something shifted. I realized that staying alive did not have to be about him. It did not have to be about proving anything or waiting for anyone to choose me. For the first time, the thought crossed my mind that my life might belong to me, even now, especially now. That idea, small as it was, sparked something stubborn inside me. I focused on simple things, the feel of the wood beneath my shoulder, the sound of my own breath. I told myself to stay with those sensations, to hold on to them for just a little longer. I did not pray. I did not bargain. I simply refused to let go yet. The world beyond the porch continued as if I were not there. A car passed at the end of the street, headlights sweeping briefly across the snow before disappearing. Somewhere, a door slammed, laughter echoing faintly. Life moved on, indifferent and unstoppable. Despite my resolve, my body had its own limits. The shivering slowed, then stopped. My thoughts grew softer, less distinct. I felt myself slipping, not suddenly, but gently, like easing into sleep. I remember thinking that if this was the end, it felt quieter than I had imagined. I whispered Ethan's name, not as a plea, but as a habit formed long ago. The sound barely left my lips. Then there were other noises, distant and unfamiliar. Voices, maybe. Light flared somewhere above me, too bright to look at. Hands touched my arm, solid and real. I tried to hold on to that sensation, but the effort was too much. The cold finally loosened its grip, and everything went dark. If you are still watching after that moment, and your heart felt heavy, comment number 6 below. What happened next changed everything, not just physically, but emotionally in ways I never expected. Now, let's move on to chapter 7. I woke to a ceiling that was too white and lights that hummed softly above me. For a moment, I thought I was still dreaming, caught in that strange place between sleep and waking where nothing quite makes sense. My body felt heavy, wrapped in layers I could not see, and every breath moved slowly, as if it had to push through something thick. The smell of disinfectant lingered in the air, sharp and clean, nothing like the cold night I remembered. When awareness settled in, it came without panic. I realized I was in a hospital room. There were machines beside the bed, their steady sounds marking time in a way the night before had not. My hands lay on the blanket, pale and stiff, and when I tried to move my fingers, they responded sluggishly, like they belonged to someone else. I was alive. The thought arrived quietly, without relief or gratitude, just a simple fact. A nurse came in later and explained what had happened. She said I had been brought in with severe hypothermia and that another hour outside could have ended things very differently. A neighbor had found me early in the morning and called for help, a stranger, someone who did not know my name, my history, or what I had given up to stand on that porch. I thanked her, though the words felt small. When she left, the room grew quiet again. My phone sat on the table beside the bed, plugged into a charger. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. My hands trembled, whether from the cold still trapped in my bones or from something deeper I could not tell. The screen lit up. No missed calls, no messages. The silence was complete. That was when the truth settled fully into me. Ethan knew. At some point, he had been told what happened, or he would be soon. And even if he did not know every detail yet, he knew enough. Enough to come. Enough to check. Enough to care. He had chosen not to. The understanding hurt more than the cold ever had, because it was deliberate. It was a decision. I lay back against the pillow and closed my eyes. I did not cry. I did not feel angry. What I felt was hollow, as if something essential had been scooped out and left behind an echo. I thought of the stranger who had stopped, the one person who had seen me and acted. I thought of how easy it had been for him to care, how little it had cost him. The contrast was almost unbearable. My husband crossed my mind then, uninvited but welcome. I imagined what he would have said if he were there, how his hand would have rested on mine, steady and warm. He would not have allowed this to happen. The thought did not bring comfort so much as clarity. The life I had built around taking care of others had left me exposed in ways I had never admitted before. Later, I overheard fragments of conversation in the hallway. A nurse mentioned that someone had called asking about me, but had not come by. I did not ask who. I already knew. Somewhere beyond these walls, a story was forming that did not include the truth. I sensed that blame would be softened, details blurred, responsibilities shifted. I felt no urge to correct it. I turned my face toward the window. Outside, the winter light was pale and thin, but it existed. The world had moved on without me, and yet here I was. Surviving was not the ending I had imagined, but it was a beginning of sorts. As I lay there listening to the quiet rhythm of the machines, I understood something clearly for the first time. Living through that night meant I would not return to who I had been before. Coming home from the hospital felt stranger than I expected. My apartment was exactly as I had left it, quiet and orderly, but I moved through it like a guest rather than its owner. The air smelled faintly of the cleaner I had used days before, and the silence pressed in around me, heavier than it ever had. I set my bag down by the door and stood there for a moment, aware that something in me had shifted. I was alive, but I was not the same woman who had walked out of this place believing she would be welcome back. The days that followed passed slowly. I rested, drank water, followed the doctor's instructions. What I did not do was check my phone the way I used to. No messages came from Ethan, no apology, no question about how close I had come to not coming home at all. The absence did not shock me anymore. It confirmed what I already knew. One afternoon, when the light outside was thin and gray, I sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop and a stack of papers I had avoided for years. Bank statements, automatic payment records, numbers that told a story I had never wanted to read straight through. Month after month, my money had flowed outward in steady lines, supporting a life that was no longer connected to mine in any meaningful way. I did not feel angry as I looked at those figures. I felt tired in a deep, settled way that had nothing to do with my body recovering. I understood then that continuing as I had been would mean accepting what had happened as normal. It would mean telling myself that love required silence and endurance, even when it nearly cost me my life. My hand hovered over the trackpad for a long moment before I acted. I canceled the automatic transfers one by one: the mortgage assistance, the insurance payments, the small savings accounts I had built for my grandchildren. Each confirmation felt final, not dramatic. There was no rush of triumph, no sense of revenge, only a quiet click, followed by a stillness I had not felt in years. As I closed the laptop, something caught my eye in the paperwork beside me. My name. Still there, printed clearly on the home agreement I had once signed without hesitation. I realized, with a faint sense of disbelief, that I still had legal standing. I could have demanded explanations. I could have forced conversations that had been denied to me. The power was there, waiting to be used. I chose not to touch it. That decision surprised me more than anything else. I did not want leverage. I did not want apologies wrung from fear or obligation. What I wanted was space, distance, the ability to breathe without measuring what it would cost someone else. When the tears came, they were quiet and brief. They slid down my face and disappeared into my hands, carrying with them years of unspoken disappointment. When they stopped, I noticed how light the room felt. The same walls, the same furniture, but I was sitting differently, straighter, as if I had finally set something down. I walked to the window and watched the snow melt along the curb, turning into thin streams of water that ran toward the drain. I knew this choice would not go unnoticed. There would be consequences, questions, accusations, maybe. But for the first time, those possibilities did not frighten me. I had drawn a line, not to punish anyone, but to protect myself. And standing there, alone but steady, I understood that peace did not come from being needed. It came from knowing when to stop giving. If you are still here and you felt the weight of that decision, comment number 8 below. Because the final part of this story is not about confrontation, but about what happens when the people who hurt you finally reach out. Let's move toward the ending. Time moved differently after I stopped sending the money. The days no longer felt like something I had to endure. They simply passed, one after another, quiet and unremarkable in the best way. I settled into small routines that belonged only to me. Morning coffee by the window, short walks when the weather allowed, evenings spent reading instead of waiting for my phone to light up. Peace did not arrive all at once, but it stayed once it came. I did not hear from Ethan right away. That silence told me more than words ever could. When the support stopped, so did the illusion of connection. Still, I was not surprised when the cracks began to show. A neighbor mentioned seeing unfamiliar cars at their house. Conversations held in tense voices. Someone else commented that things did not seem as comfortable there as they once had. I listened without asking questions. Their struggles were no longer mine to manage. The message finally came one afternoon while I was folding laundry. Just a few lines from Ethan, carefully phrased, neutral. He asked if we could talk soon. No apology, no acknowledgement of the night I almost died. A short while later, another message followed, suggesting dinner, mentioning that the children missed me. It was written as if nothing had happened, as if time alone had smoothed everything over. I read the words slowly, more than once. I waited for the familiar rush of hope, the instinct to fix, to forgive, to step back into the role I had played for decades. It did not come. Instead, there was a calm clarity that surprised me. I could see the message for what it was. An invitation built on need, not remorse. A door opening only because something behind it had begun to collapse. Memories surfaced uninvited. The porch light cutting through the snow, the curtain closing, the hospital room filled with quiet machines and unanswered questions. I remembered how it felt to lie there, knowing my son had chosen not to come. That pain had not disappeared, but it no longer controlled me. It had taught me something I could not unlearn. I set my phone down on the table and did nothing. I did not argue. I did not explain. I did not remind him of the cold or the hospital bed or the weeks of silence that followed. I did not need to. Any response would have pulled me back into a conversation that had never truly included me. The room around me felt steady, grounded. My apartment, small as it was, held my life now, not the pieces of someone else's. I understood that going back would mean shrinking myself again, pretending that what happened could be erased by a shared meal and polite smiles. So I chose not to return, not out of anger, but out of self-respect. I turned the phone face down and let the quiet settle in. For the first time, it did not feel like abandonment. It felt like a boundary, finally held. Life did not change in any dramatic way after I chose silence. There was no sudden happiness, no triumphant sense of victory. What came instead was something quieter and far more lasting. My days continued much as they had before, but I moved through them differently. I no longer measured time by who might call or what I still owed. I woke, breathed, and lived without bracing myself for disappointment. One afternoon, a letter arrived in the mail. The envelope was plain, the handwriting careful. Inside was a short note from a woman at the hospital, someone who remembered me from the days I spent recovering. She wrote to thank me for my kindness, for the way I had spoken gently even when I was weak and frightened. She said she hoped to carry that same patience into her own life. I held the letter for a long time, surprised by how much warmth such a small thing could bring. A stranger had seen me more clearly than my own family ever had. That was when it finally settled into me. My worth had never depended on how much I gave or how quietly I endured. It had simply been there, waiting for me to recognize it myself. I thought about how often I had confused sacrifice with love, how easily I had accepted pain as the price of belonging. The truth was simpler than that. Love should not require you to disappear. I began to understand that family is not defined by blood alone. It is defined by safety, by care that does not come with conditions, by doors that open instead of close when you are most vulnerable. Anyone who asks you to freeze, emotionally or otherwise, just to stay connected is not offering love. They are asking for obedience. I still felt sadness when I thought of Ethan. That did not vanish, and I did not expect it to. Healing did not erase the past, but it loosened its grip. The memories no longer controlled me. They existed alongside new ones, quieter moments filled with simple comfort and choice. One evening, I stood by the window as the last of the snow melted away, revealing dark pavement beneath. The season was changing. So was I. I said the words aloud then, not as a declaration, but as an understanding I had earned. Rejection is not hate. It is love turned inward. If anyone ever hears my story and recognizes themselves in it, I hope they know this. Walking away does not make you cruel. Choosing yourself does not make you weak. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop knocking on a door that has already been closed and turn toward the life waiting quietly behind you. Sometimes the deepest wounds are not caused by what is said, but by what is withheld. Being pushed aside, ignored, or treated as optional can quietly erode a lifetime of love and sacrifice. Yet even in those moments, there is a turning point. When giving becomes a source of pain, choosing to stop is not cruelty. It is clarity. Letting go is not weakness. It is the moment self-respect finally speaks louder than guilt. Peace does not always arrive with apologies or repaired relationships. Often, it comes in silence, in boundaries, in the decision to protect what is left of your heart. Walking away does not mean you lost. Sometimes, it means you finally chose yourself. Thank you for taking the time to listen to this story. If it resonated with you or reminded you of your own journey, feel free to share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. And if you would like to hear more stories like this, please consider liking, subscribing, and following the channel.